Welcome, everybody, and hello. We are here with Applied Anthroposophy Seed Series night. We're here with Brian Gray, and I'm so excited to welcome him. And it's our first real kickoff presentation. So glad you're here. I'm going to turn it over to Jordan to read a verse, and I invite you to also light a candle if you have one nearby. So you're a mute, Jordan.
There we go. So we will be able to free ourselves from materialism only if we develop our knowledge to the point where it is again raised beyond conceptions of purely earthly relationships and is again able to encompass an understanding of the stars and of the sun. Rudolf Steiner.
Thanks, Jordan. And I'm going to introduce you to Brian. I've had such great interaction with Brian. He actually read my star chart a couple of years ago, and it really changed my life. He's living up in Northern California and is kind of has many skills as a teacher, lecturer, musician, architect, author, longtime anthroposopher, working for so long at Rudolf Steiner College, almost 40 years, and really helping that foundation program to get rooted there and carrying that. He also is a Waldorf teacher, has a background in architecture, and is a master landscaper, and just a jack of all trades, and truly just one of the most warm, loving anthroposophists I have met in this work that I have taken on. So I am so grateful to have you here with us tonight, Brian, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Tess. What a very kind introduction. So dear friends, our theme for this evening is freedom and love, or love and freedom. And what an immense topic. I mean, so the thing is, Rudolf Steiner had many things to say about both topics, about the nature of love and the nature of freedom. And but we also realized that these are not abstract questions, that you could say, in a certain sense, you feel that every human being on the earth feels a desire to be free. We feel restricted either by our family, or by the culture in which we're living, or by, even more so, sometimes we feel restricted by other people. But even more so, friends, even if we're able to break free from the authority or the limitations set by other people, we actually are also deeply subjected to our own limitations. And that it is, we are not inwardly free, because we are bound very much by our instincts and by our passions and desires and by our impulses. There are certain things, you could say, that are factored in to us biologically and also into our soul life, that in a certain sense we feel set up obstacles for us fulfilling what it is we feel that we want to do. And we could say, you know, Mick Jagger said it very clearly, I can't get no satisfaction. And basically, you know, so if Mick Jagger, who was extremely wealthy and extremely well-loved, can't get no satisfaction, what are the chances for others? So one can say, however, that we feel that this yearning to be free.
So sorry, I think I accidentally muted you, Brian.
Thank you, I got it. I think, yeah, okay. So what is it that why do we yearn for freedom is one question. You know, what is it, why do we yearn for freedom? And what is the nature of love? And so let's start with the question of love first. Rudolf Steiner tells us, of course, there are many forms of love. And by the way, Rene Corrido, my teacher, has written a book not only on Chartres and on the mysteries of the Holy Grail, But Rene Credo has also written this lovely book. I'll show you the cover of it. Reflections on the Mysteries of Love. Let's see if I can get it there. Yes, Reflections on the Mystery of Love. Yeah. And this book by Rene Credo, Rene, of course, was also a very experienced human being, and he goes into aspects of love that Rudolf Steiner doesn't cover in great detail. You could say what we would call more, whereas Rudolf Steiner tends to say sensual love is basically ego-driven, egotistical, but is necessary to continue the species. But he says love can be freed from the body, and we begin to enter into a soul and spiritual level of love. Rene does a nice job of articulating different levels of love. And I'm just going to show you a quick page here. Let me find it here. So this is the 7 levels of love. I know this is tiny for you, but I will read it to you. So he says, love it. So Rene suggests that just as we have a physical body, which is our form and has the senses in it, and this is the part which we perceive, there is also an etheric body, which is our vitality, our life forces, that which is breathing us and circulating our blood and digesting our food and so forth. And in addition to that, we have a body of consciousness, which is called the astral body. And the astral body gives us this inner sensations, we begin to become aware inwardly of the situations going on around us. The astral body also can carry on certain stages of consciousness that are independent of what appears to be going on outside us. So the astral body begins to be our inner world. And then gradually around, and you could say these parts of us develop slowly in the child. The child is developing the physical body primarily between birth and 7. Of course, the etheric body is present, but the etheric body begins to be more rhythmic between 7 and 14. The astral body begins to liberate itself as the teenager between 14 and 21 begins to have these inner passions and desires. And around the age of 21, and hopefully increasing from that point forward, from the age of 21, we begin to get a deeper sense of who we are as an ego, as an I am. And we are working toward transforming our astral body to the stage of spirit self or manas, and gradually transforming our etheric body into the stage of buddhi or life spirit. These are the higher members of the human being that we have not yet fully achieved. And the ego gradually will transform in future incarnations, transform even the form of the physical body to Atman, or the spirit form. Now, Rene suggests that there is a level of love at each of these different parts. So Rene suggests that at the physical level of the physical body, warmth is the basic characteristic. The basic nature of love, of course, for the newborn child is the warmth of the mother and holding the child at her breast and nourishing with the warm milk and so forth. So this aspect of warmth is love at the level of the physical body. And now there is a shadow side. If the warmth is not offered, the negative aspect of that, the lack of warmth, is a feeling of coldness. And this can also enter into certain kinds of relationships, as we're all aware. But warmth is love at the physical level. And then Rene suggests at the level of the etheric body, the life body, we have affection or tenderness. So affection, the kind of the warm feelings of affection, the smiles, the little pats, the joys, and so forth, affection and tenderness. But missing that, if that goes away, there can develop, as a lack of affection and tenderness, the feeling of indifference or isolation, which is a feeling of loss. That when you're affectionate with somebody and then they're indifferent to you, you feel bereft a bit. It leaves a feeling of change. And the level of the astral body, Rene suggests that the level of the astral body is where desire and passion and a certain harmony can also arise. And this is also, of course, in the teenager, this is where sexuality begins to be more prominent. So desire, passion, and harmony is you could say this is a characteristic of love at the level of the astral body. And the absence of that leads to a feeling of disharmony or rejection. So those of us who went through teenage sweethearts and then lost them, we may have gone through some of that, and we may still go through it even later. But of course, these things are cumulative. Now, around the age of 21, you could say, from 21 onward, the level of love, which goes beyond the body, you could say the physical, etheric, and astral bodies, these are what Rudolf Steiner would characterize as bodily love or sensualized love. But at the level of the I, it's recognition. So when we get to the age of 21, it's possible to form a perfect love relationship with somebody where there is no desire for sexual union. There is no intention, where you could say affection is not the goal, nor is seeking a personal, a bodily warmth. Rather, just to recognize another human being and say, what a wonderful human being. I really love that person, you see? So love can also operate purely at the level of the I, and it doesn't necessarily need the bodily aspects to express itself. Now, gradually, we will be able, as we transform our astral body to manas, the recognition, the level of love will be seen as a kind of revelation. Not only do I think this is a really wonderful human being, I begin to perceive as though in a revelation, the totality of this person's story. I begin to understand who this person really is. I begin to have a deeper knowledge of this person, and it becomes a kind of revelation. And as we gradually will be able to transform our etheric body to buddhi, that level of love will become the capacity to redeem, the capacity for redemption and healing. Yes. So whereas at the level of the loss of revelation would be stagnation or apathy, the loss of redemption or healing would be the onset of illness or a kind of destruction. But the noble level of love at the level of buddhi would be a love which has a kind of redeeming, healing effect. And we've known people who have had this effect upon us, and hopefully we've been able to offer some of this kind of healing and redemptive understanding to others as well. Gradually, the highest form of love is the level of sacrifice. And the negative of that would be a kind of egoism and a kind of abstraction where we lose touch with the other person when we become completely disassociated with the other human being. Of course, the highest level of sacrifice was performed by the Christ being who united with the body of Jesus around the age of 30, and for 3 years then entered into the body of Jesus and penetrated that body, became one with it, and then united with the earth. And since the time of resurrection at Easter, the Christ has been the spirit of the earth. And one could say we begin to realize that this is the highest level of sacrifice. This is the highest level of love. And that's why Rudolf Steiner will very often, not from the point of view of a religious tradition, but rather from the point of view of his own spiritual perception, Rudolf Steiner was able to perceive the truth of what the Christ actually did for 3 years in the body of Jesus between the baptism and the crucifixion and resurrection. That Christ came from the sun sphere, bringing love and the potential as a sacrifice, and uniting with humanity so that we can become spirits of a particular quality. Now, friends, Rudolf Steiner is able to tell us what our ultimate goal is. We will gradually be known. There are spirits in the spiritual world. There are beings in the spiritual world called the seraphim, and they're known as the spirits of love. And there are the cherubim, and they're the spirits of the harmonies. And there are the thrones, the spirits of will. And there are also the Kyriates, spirits of wisdom, dynamis, spirits of motion, exousiae, spirits of form. And there are archai, who are known as the time spirits. They're spirits of the time spirits. the archai. There are archangels, the spirits of fire. There are the angels who are called the sons of life. And then there is the human being. Now, friends, what will we become known as? We're not there yet, but what will we will be known as spirits of something. We will be known as spirits of freedom and love. Wow. Okay. So you can say that the purpose of being a human being, ultimately, we are on the path, whether we're conscious of it or not. We are on a long journey. We have all incarnated many times on the earth, but we are on a journey through our repeated incarnations to continue to return to the earth, striving to become spirits of freedom and love. And one day, not necessarily right away, gradually, the word grail comes from the word gradalis, which means gradually or step by step. Gradually, we pure fools, we Parsifals, we are, by the way, we are pure fools because in order for us to come into a sense of freedom, we had to feel a feeling of separation from the spiritual world. And so we are born, not in utter nakedness and not in utter forgetfulness, but trailing clouds of glory. And do we come to earth, which is our home? But one could say the sense of trailing clouds of glory is that we have inherited, we have brought certain things to bear. We've brought certain things with us. And what we've inherited really is, we've inherited the capacity, that's not what I want to, hold on, let's see here. Okay, so what we have inherited, we've inherited the potential to forget, but we've inherited the capacity to think. So thinking, Rudolf Steiner says, thinking is actually the result of how we lived in the spiritual world before we were born. And the activities and the experiences that we had in the spiritual world were lawful. That is, we were experiencing interchanges between these various spiritual beings known as the spiritual hierarchies. And so we could say there is a lawful, the thinking activity is lawful because the spiritual world, we could say we have inherited the lawful ability to think logically, to think in sequence, that there are certain laws that regulate the activity of thinking, which in other words, and so let's go into a little bit of how do we understand the world? How do we function in the nature of thinking? Because thinking is also of crucial importance to becoming spirits of freedom and love. Just to finish the story I began, we entered into a world of forgetfulness in order that we can feel separate. And Rudolf Steiner says we enter into a physical body so that because we are united with the thinking in the spiritual world, in order to be able to experience thinking in a new way. That is, we now have entered this beautiful world that we call the world of the senses, the world of the animal and the mineral and the plant and the human beings and all the world of the stars and planets and all the elemental spirits. This wonderful world that we're living in is actually given to us as an opportunity to feel separate from the spiritual world, to begin to come to a sense of our own individuality, to begin to develop a sense of self-love and a feeling of selfness, and to gradually lose that which we have inherited, which is the feeling of union with all the spiritual beings. Now, gradually, as we grow up, Rudolf Steiner tells us that over thousands of years ago, when we incarnated before the time, even back in ancient India and in ancient Atlantis, we did not feel so strongly our sense of self, but we felt much more that we were connected with each other and we could still perceive angels and archangels and archai. Spiritual beings were as real to us as trees and rocks and clouds are today. So gradually we had to lose that feeling of connection to come into a feeling of separation, because only if we feel separate can we begin to feel our own individuality, and can we then begin to develop the capacity to come into a sense of freedom. Now, and the Philosophy of Freedom, which Rudolf Steiner wrote. By the way, there's some wonderful books, but I'll go to this one next. Just give you a quick picture. This book, it's been well worn. I've taught this book over 100 times, and it's known as The Philosophy of Freedom. And this particular translation, which I think is by Michael Lipson. Yes, Michael Lipson did this translation. Absolutely beautiful. It has been called A Philosophy of Freedom or A Philosophy of Spiritual Activity. This particular translation, which Michael Lipson did, is called Intuitive Thinking as a Spiritual Path, A Philosophy of Freedom. And friends, this book really has, Rudolf Steiner was asked near the end of his life what he felt his greatest contribution was. And he said, the philosophy of freedom will outlive everything else, will outlast everything else that I've given. Now that's out of 6,000 lectures and over 50 books. So out of, you could say this is, Rudolf Steiner considered this his most significant work, the one that would bear the greatest fruit for the future. And you could say, but there's no mention of spiritual hierarchies, there's no angels, there's no old Saturn or future Jupiter. What is he talking about? What's so significant about this book? Well, what you get is, as you begin to read the book, the only way you can get the book is by willing your thinking. It's not an impossible read, but it's pretty stiff. So once you begin, you begin reading the book, and it seems like it's going to be just fine. But then you get into it a little ways, and you realize, wait a minute, something's happening to me. So he starts it: is a human being spiritually free, or subject to the iron necessity of purely natural law? Nice place to start. Conscious human action. But he then develops this whole book in a beautiful way, and he's asking ultimate questions that lead us not to theoretical answers, but lead us into our own experiences. We are led into the how do we function? If you say, I know something to be true, how do we know that? What gives us a feeling of certainty in knowing? If I say that I know I'm living, I know I'm in my office in Fair Oaks and I'm sitting before here, standing here, how do I know that? You see? So Rudolf Steiner tells us there are two fundamental activities that every human being engages in. Each of us engage in the activity of feeling, of observing and thinking. Now I'm going to go to the blackboard and we'll see if we can develop this a little bit. So, so can you all see that? Let's see. I'm just going to adjust the camera a little bit. So what we have here, friends, you could say there are two fundamental activities that every human being is engaged in. When we are awake, when we wake up, we open our eyes and the world pours into our senses. And we call this activity, this is the activity of observing. So you wake up from a deep sleep and you observe that you were living in a kind of another space of time. But as you open your eyes, the light streams in, the forms stream in, and through the activity of perceiving, through the senses. Now, in fact, how many senses do we have? We don't have time to exhaust this, but there are 12 senses, friends. There are 12 different senses. The sense of touch, the sense of life, the sense of self-movement, the sense of balance, the sense of smell, the sense of taste, the sense of life, the sense of life, yes, the sense of warmth, the sense of hearing, the sense of language, the sense of thought, and the sense of the ego of the other. So there are 12 different senses. So the world, through the world of observing, the world pours into us and we perceive. So what we have is the content of whatever impression we receive, we can call that the percept. So this is philosophy of freedom. The percept is the content of what we perceive when the senses deliver something to us. Now, but the percept is incomplete. The percept is missing something. When I see something, that I've never seen before, the question is immediately, what is it? So you could say, what do you mean? You see it, it's right there. You can touch it, you can taste it. What do you mean, what is it? No, well, what I'm asking for is, what is the concept? What is the idea? You see? So that we know that through observing, the content of what we observe presents itself to us as something that we sense, but we don't have immediately the concept. We have to do something. In order to get the concept, we have to engage in a second activity. So reticence is, in fact, in sequence of time, observing typically precedes thinking. We observe something, which gives us the content of what it is as a percept, but it's missing a vital part. It's missing the concept or the idea of the thing. So we have to engage in a second activity. Now, just as you could say we perceive things through the 12 senses, and we receive percepts all day long from the sense world, we also say there are 12 different points of view that allow us to inwardly touch what that percept might be. Now, the truth of the matter is there is a lawful relationship between a percept and a concept, but it's not given to us. The concept is not given with the percept. The percept is usually called the given philosophically, but the not given is what we have to add to it to complete our understanding. In order for us to form a mental picture, we have to find the concept that matches the percept. Now, there is a lawful relationship between these two things, but one of them is given, and one of them we have to inwardly touch, and we do that through the activity of intuitive thinking. And so we have an intuition. Just as we can touch something through perceiving, we can inwardly touch it. The inward touching is called intuition, which literally means inwardly touching something. But that requires that we activate the second activity. We activate thinking ourselves. So normally the senses give us things without our having to do much seeking. This observing tends to be a bit of a passive activity, but thinking requires us to be active. Now, when we find the concept, if I stand before an object and I perceive it to be tall and large, with shaggy bark, red, brown, shaggy bark, and needles shaped in a particular form, and it's really, really tall and really, really large, I gradually will form the concept, this is a redwood tree, yes? So redwood tree is not just a name, it's actually the concept that fits the percept. Those two things together, I will form a mental picture of, and that mental picture will be my knowledge of it, my experience. Now, I can continually observe new things about the redwood tree and find new ideas about it and expand my knowledge and my experience. But there is a lawful relationship. If I perceive the redwood tree and said, this is a humpback whale, there's something, ultimately, if I tried to form that mental picture and sell it to other people or communicate it to other people, it would be a complete loss, because they would say, "That's you idiot. That's not a humpback whale. That's a redwood tree. Don't you? So you must not be observing or thinking right. Either your senses, there's something faulty in the way you're perceiving, or there's something mistaken in your forming thinking. But the truth of the matter is, this activity, which we call cognition, this is a lawful activity. Now, friends, are we going to find freedom in a lawful activity? Do we find freedom in a lawful activity? No, what we find is lawfulness. But thank goodness we find lawfulness, because science and cognition and recognition and forming mental pictures and being able to function in the world is very much dependent upon the fact that the percepts and the concepts belong together. Now, I form an inner picture. I take the percept, I don't take the redwood tree into my eyes. I form a picture of it, and I maintain it as I maintain a picture of the percept, but I've also attached a concept to it, so it is a mental picture. And I can say, this is my knowledge, my experience. So a mental picture belongs to me. Now, each of us from childhood have been forming mental pictures of our parents and our siblings and our neighborhood and our school that we go to and the different things we've learned at school and so forth. We've been observing and thinking every day since our earliest memories, you could say. And what happens in between that, we begin to realize that the mental pictures we gradually get this sense of self. It gradually begins to dawn on us. And that's the whole point, is that because the world is divided in two, a third member arises in between the percept and the concept, between the observing and the thinking. I begin to get a sense of who I am. My sense of individuality begins to arise. So, and the mental pictures that I form, I call my mental pictures or my knowledge. Now, we continue to work. Not only do we form mental pictures, but we also have feelings of sympathy or antipathy. I love the redwood tree, or I don't really care for the redwood tree, or there's something about, maybe it's not the redwood tree, but there's a feeling of sympathy for things, and there's a feeling of antipathy for things. But the feelings also are my feelings. I can also to make a feeling into a percept and say, what am I feeling? I can take a mental picture and put it in front as a percept and study it. But so we have feelings, but not only do we have mental pictures and feelings, there are also different levels of will. So the level of will at the level of the physical body is called instinct. And so you could say in the presence of a particular stimulus, or you could say a stimulus response situation, an instinct would be, in other words, if I heard something loud snap above my head, and I looked up and saw a large branch of the tree beginning to fall toward me, my instinct would be to run. So instinct, but I wouldn't necessarily be forming a thought about it. And my body would, the wisdom of my body, instincts are really wisdom of the body that is reacting, that is responding at the level of the physical body without any further intervention. My instincts will guide me and to avoid certain situations instinctively without having to think about them. If I could say, well, I wonder if that limb is actually going to fall on my head. By that time, it's too late. So the instinct, the crack, and the percept will lead me directly to a response, to an action, a deed. So that's the level. That's the instinct is the level of the physical body. I also have impulses and drives, which we each have them, which are connected with our etheric body. So impulses and drives. I get thirsty. I get hungry. So one could say there's, I can't breathe. So this is connected with the life forces. So the instinct or the impulses, or you could say the impulses and the drives are connected more with our vitality and with the life processes. And again, there is a wisdom. I don't need to think about breathing. I don't need to think about heartbeat. That is all being taken place. It's all being done for me. Thank you very much. Somebody is breathing me. Somebody is circulating my blood. That is, we call that the etheric body. And now there is another level, however, at the level of the astral body. The level of will at the astral body is desire. As we know, this begins and to awaken, particularly in the teenage years, and continues on through much of the rest of life. Desire is the level of will at the astral body level. And this will lead us to yearn for a particular connection with something. A desire is usually that I feel in order for me to feel complete, I need something that somebody else has, or I need something that's from the world that I don't have that I need. So as a level of desire begins to be more of a sense of self-interest, and desire can lead us into a complete self-absorption. We can become deeply self-absorbed and self-possessed. And you could say we can even become very unpleasant to be around because we're always taking whatever it is we want. We become selfish. So desires, instincts don't lead us to be selfish, or no impulses, but desires, selfishness, self-interest, taking, the yearning, the desire, unless I can regulate that. Now you could say, friends, in education, these are the things we're trying to train. We're trying to train the child to have healthy instincts, healthy impulses, and to regulate their desires before we send them off to school. Yes, because a child who sees another piece of clothing on another child and says, "Oh, I want that," and just grabs it, is not exactly not a very civil. So we need to learn to be civil. So we need, in a certain sense, we have to regulate in order to train a human being and train a child to function in society. We need to put certain regulations, particularly in the realm of desires, certain lawful behaviors. But gradually, friends, when we become mature enough to form a clear concept and form a clear percept about the world, gradually around the age of 21 and from then on, we're not just getting desires or impulses or instincts from what we're perceiving. We're actually beginning to form a clear motive. The motive is where the I, where the sense of self, which is not only directed by the desire, but really the motive, the I, the clearest motive would be, I'm not going to let my desire or my instinct or my impulses affect how I will form an idea about what something is and what I want to do with it. So when I form a clear motive at the level of the I, an action streaming from a motive, a deed or action streaming from a motive is coming from, you could say, in fact, friends, when somebody goes to court, someone does something to another person, and the question then will be for the prosecutor to question is, was this an instinctive? So somebody's unhappy with the way they've been treated by another human being. They say this person violated me in some way. So the question will be, was it an instinctive response, or was it an impulse or a drive, or was there actually a desire that was leading this, or did the person have a definite motive in mind? What was the motive? The question of the motive begins to be a legal question. So one could say if legal court procedures are concerned about motives, we realize that motives, they have to do with how the human being is actually operating at the level of the sense of self. And gradually the I will become more ennobled. Now, so an act out of a motive will have a different outcome, hopefully, than acting out of desire or impulse or instinct. Now, so a motive is also usually I have something in mind. I'm going to arrange the concepts and percepts that I'm finding and uniting into a picture. I have a mental picture of something I want to do that will achieve something I want to. Now, I can take that into a higher level. I can gradually say, I wish. So the level of wish is even higher than the level of motive. And it's not, I wish I had a BMW, but rather, I wish I could improve. I wish I could be even better. I wish that humanity I could do something that would help humanity become more noble. And so a wish can be at a higher level. And now, we need to realize that we've been looking at the percept and the concept and the sense of self-awakening and the feelings and the mental pictures and the impulses of will leading us to deeds and actions and affecting the outer world. But we also begin to realize that so Buddhist Center gradually tells us that in fact, there is a source. How is it the percept and the concept are lawfully related? Well, the ancient peoples called this the nature of the logos. The logos has divided our experiences of the world into observing and thinking, into perceiving and intuition. But the logos is in fact the unity, the being who has given us the sense of self. So the logos ultimately kindled the I within us and left us in the world and brought us to the world so we could begin individuality. But we could say this is the source of our higher self. Now, so in addition to, we could say the intuition that forms a concept, we could say a cognitive intuition would form a cognitive. So I have a subjective percept. A mental picture is a subjective percept. It is a percept of a picture of something that I have within my soul. Now, the question is, I need to cognize the concept that belongs to that because I want to do something with it. So I will form a cognitive concept of the subjective percept, and I will then have a motive to act. Now, but Buddhist Center tells us that in addition to cognitive concepts, there is also such a thing as a moral concept. Now, the moral concept could be something that I've been told. This is what you have to do. The 10 Commandments are moral concepts, basically. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. thou shalt not commit adultery. Those are laws. Those are moral laws. And so we're not free in relationship to the laws, but we need to recognize where they apply. However, there is a moral concept which lives in us, which is not connected to anything in the outer world, nor is it connected to anything that has been done yet. It is, and you could say it is accessible to us. It is a moral concept, but it comes directly into us as though from above. We even say, I was walking down the street one day and I had this amazing thought, and I said, gosh, I wonder if I could do this. That's a moral concept. And in fact, now, depending upon whether I want to turn it merely into a wish, because a wish is a higher level of will, or if I can even take the wish and turn it into an intention. An intention is much more serious than a wish. I intend not to make the world a better place. Or we can take it even further. I resolve, before I die, I'm going to improve this situation for my fellow human beings. I'm going to bring about this change in the world through my action, because I resolve, that's who I am. But Rudolf Steiner tells us the first moral intuition we get is around the age of 3. The first moral intuition, every one of us, we receive moral intuitions. Moral intuitions are, like you could say, they're our higher self whispering things into our soul. And the first moral intuition is I. Around the age of 3, every child begins to say, I am. This is a moral intuition. This doesn't come from perceiving and thinking from the outer world, but rather this is a direct intuition that comes from, we could say, from God or from the Logos, this direct sense of who we are. So once we say, I am, the question is, now what? Now I gradually, through around the age of 7, 14, 21, so forth, the I continues to develop its sense of self. The I has to wrestle with instincts and impulses and desires. The I has to gradually form motives, clear wishes, and set certain intentions and resolves into place, depending upon what we intend to do. But we could say now, we have the potential here. When we're dealing with percepts and concepts, the actions that we have to perform will be conditioned by the situation. In other words, if I declare that the redwood tree, I'm going to take the redwood tree to SeaWorld, and it's going to prove to everybody that it's a humpback whale, I'm going to be in trouble because there's no law, there's no way I'm going to be able to convince people with that. But you could say, so there is a lawful relationship between this, but there are certain, you could say, the mental pictures, the act of knowledge, the act of perceiving the right thing to do in a situation. This is more or less, there's a lawful relationship with this. But remember, freedom is not dependent upon lawful relationships, because lawful relationships can also restrict us. But so we can begin to say, but at the level of wish or intention, or the level of resolve, there is no percept that I am yet perceived. There is no action done. I have a wish for something to exist that doesn't exist in the perceptible world. Therefore, my wish is to make it happen through my deeds. Or I have an intention to make something present that's not present, or I have a resolve to make something present that's not present. So I am free if I'm operating out of the level of moral imagination and forming moral concepts out of moral intuition. And the technique, so Rudolf Steiner calls this, the level of forming a moral concept is a direct intuition, and it comes from the same place that I come from. In other words, a moral intuition is an idea which is coming at the same level of quality where I first began to experience myself. It is my spiritual nature. It is my higher self speaking within me. I resolve to do this before I die. I hope this is making a little bit of sense. So anyway, this is the nature of freedom. Is we begin to be free when we move up the ladder from instinct and impulse and desire and motive, and we gradually begin to form the potential for creating a world that does not yet exist. We don't perceive the world; it doesn't exist yet. but we form a picture of it, we form an intention, we form a resolve for it. And the technique that we then use to deliver that is called moral technique. So we have a moral intuition that gives us a moral concept. We form a picture of it. Now the picture, the moral imagination, is like the mental picture was. The difference is the mental picture arose from a percept and a concept that existed. But an imagination has to form a percept. It has to form a relationship to the conceptual world, because I'm not dealing with something which is already existing. I'm dealing with the potential for something new. So I have to imagine what it might look like, and I have to imagine how it might come about. So I began with moral imagination. I have to imagine what it might perceive, what I might perceive it as, and I have to imagine the thoughts and the ideas that will comprise it. So anyway, friends, when I act out of this level, and I'm acting out of wish or intention or resolve and working out of moral intuitions and moral imagination, the deeds that I perform, I experience them to be free. I experience them to be creative. So, and you could say, what is the driving force? Why would I do such a thing? Buddha says the driving force at these higher levels is love for the deed. So on the one hand, freedom is the ability to imagine something that doesn't yet exist, and to intend and to set something in motion to make it happen. But the reason to make it happen is because it is part of my creative impulse. My love to do it makes the action not into a lawful action, but into a creative action, into a free action. So this is a very brief way of looking at this. By the way, this other part of the drawing here is just to show us again that in the level of the head, the center of the nerve sense system, the red is the will, the yellow is the feeling, the blue is the level of thinking, and the head region, the thinking is dominating, the blue, but we do have thinking going through the chest and the rhythmic system, and we're even thinking down into the metabolic limb system to certain degrees. I intend to put my hand here so I can give direction. My thinking gives direction to the will. And my feeling is the experience between those two. Feeling is moderating between those two. In the metabolic limb system, which is connected with the world of space, the will is dominating. Now, but the amazing thing, friends, is in this middle system, in the chest, in the rhythmic system, which is connected with the mysteries of time, we have the pulse and the breath. There's a lawful relationship between breathing and the circulation of blood. I breathe about 18 times a minute. I should say breathing, not breathing. I breathe about 18 times a minute. But my heartbeat, my pulse is 4 times that. So my pulse is around 72, yes. So there's a lawful relationship between the breath, the lung activity, and the blood circulation. And that is the basis for our feeling life, and it's the basis for our whole middle system. But you also see that in this middle system, where the heart is, you can say the heart, of course, is this portion of us here. If you wanted to give it an expression, the heart is the center of our being. Rita Center says in the region of the human heart is there's something greater going on. It's the most spiritual part of our being, because this is the place where the heart is sensing the will impulses, the feeling impulses, the thought impulses, along with all the experiences of the physical body and the astral body and the etheric body and the I. It's all coming together here. So the human heart can go to the lengths of God. Yeah. So this is the feeling that we begin to get. So this is just a hint, friends, to say we are very complex beings as human beings. You may have noticed that. Yeah, we are complex, but we can begin to understand how we operate. We observe the world, and if we think about it, we form mental pictures out of the concepts and percepts that we arise. We operate out of those, and gradually we begin to form higher wishes and intentions and resolves. And the more that we have achieved in terms of doing something, adding something new to the world, we feel we've made a contribution to the world. If we're inactive or we're lazy, we're only going to be responding to our lower nature. Now, are we okay? So far, so good? Okay. So let's see what we can do.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Brian.
Okay. So what I think I'm going to do is just turn very briefly to a couple of books. We looked at intuitive thinking briefly. There is also there's a collection, there's two books that I really highly recommend, three books. Love and Its Meaning in the World is a collection. Love and Its Meaning in the World, lectures by Rudolf Steiner. This was put together by, I think, Chris Banford and Anthroposophic Press in 1998. But it includes a lecture cycle called Love, the lecture called Love and Its Meaning in the World. But he has added to it many other lectures by Rudolf Steiner, and they give us a beautiful picture of the mission of the division into the sexes, Lucifer and Christ, and the mission of reverence, the mission of the earth, the Buddhist teaching of compassion and love, faith, love, hope, love and its meaning in the world, and so forth. So anyway, this is a wonderful collection, and I highly encourage you to explore it, because it is filled with tremendous treasures. There's another beautiful collection put together called Rudolf Steiner's Vision of Love. It has different covers on it, but Bernard Nesfield Cookson put this together. This was given to me 30 years ago by Dennis Klosek when Marianne and I got married. But this was actually put together in 1981. So, anyway, Rudolf Steiner's Vision of Love, Spiritual Science and the Logic of the Heart, absolutely beautiful. And again, beautiful collection of lectures and thoughts. So Bernard Nesfield Cookson he goes through different topics, and he'll integrate quotes by Rudolf Steiner and portray them, but then begin to help us understand them. So it's a kind of an interpretive understanding of these different ideas. And there's a chapter here called Love and Freedom, the Essential Nature of Thinking, which is worth its weight in gold. But so we would need more time to develop that. Now, there's also this lovely book, which is called Universal Spirituality and Human Physicality, Bridging the Divide. And this is a collection. It's called, this was in the collected works, it's CW 202, Universal Spirituality and Human Physicality. It includes lectures called The Search for the New Isis and the Divine Sophia. And also there are three lectures called the Bridge Lectures, which are a part of this. Bridging the Divide is a subtitle. Anyway, these lectures are also absolutely gorgeous, and they're very pertinent. There's a couple of quick passages I would like to read to you to see if I can find it. Well, he says, let me see if I can, I'm realizing we're short here at time. So Rudolf Steiner says, so there's something about the nature of freedom and love which is essential to the human being. And what is it? What is it about freedom and love? So we're supposed to be free, spirits of freedom and love. So what? That's a big deal. But actually, what he begins to say is actually, love is our experience, the experience that we have in the spiritual world before we are conceived, before we entered into relationship with the body. Our spirit formed a soul which had to metamorphose itself from the realm of the spiritual world, which is filled with love. We were living in a state of love, and we had the intention to come to the earth. And love is, in fact, the inheritance of what we experienced before we were conceived. So the love that so he says, when we love someone, we often have the feeling that, if I love somebody, then I'll get a reward for it. If I do something good for somebody, if I do something loving for somebody else, then someone will recognize that and they'll give me a pat on the back, or they'll give me a raise or whatever. But that's self-interest. That's not love. That's self-involvement. That's selfishness. So he says, if we actually do a deed of love, doing the deed is its own reward. He says, well, actually, when we do something out of pure love, we expect nothing more than to be able to fulfill the deed. And if we truly put our intention behind that and do it merely for the love of doing it, we are in fact repaying the love that we lived in before we were born. So effectively, love is the principle. He says the principle of love is the love to incarnate and to live on the earth. So love is actually an inheritance in a certain sense. So he says, when we do something out of pure love, we shouldn't expect anything more from it, because we're in fact paying back a debt. We're paying back the debt that we lived in the spiritual world, and we're given the opportunity through love to be born. But he says the impulse of freedom is exactly the opposite of that. He says ultimately freedom is a freedom because, as we all notice as we get older, our body starts to become more and more dense and more difficult to maneuver. And we begin to feel perhaps that, still not right, we begin to feel that here, that out of, that freedom is in fact the freedom to leave our body and to go back into the spiritual world. So he says, in fact, love is the precondition to coming into to being born and living on the earth. But freedom is, in fact, the impulse which liberates us from the body and leads us back into the spiritual world so that we can digest our experiences and then, of course, set the stage to love to come back again. So freedom and love are essential qualities. They're not just some virtues that somebody thought up, oh yeah, that human beings should be spirits of freedom and love. And Fredo says there are no other spiritual beings who are really capable of the spirit of developing as independent beings of freedom and love, except for the human being. And so I think I'm going to have to cut to the chase here and go to this quote, which I showed you, but I'll read it to you this time. That's not the one. Here it is. So this is the lecture from December 1920, 100 years ago. In 1920, we were in October of 2021. 100 years ago, Rhoda Center gave this quote. Just as we attain freedom by imbuing and illuminating our thoughts with will, so he tells us we have to will our thinking if we want our thinking to be free. If we're just thinking automatically, we will find lawfulness, but we won't find any freedom. We have to will our thinking. So he says, so we come to love by pervading our life of will with thoughts. In our actions, we develop love by letting thoughts stream into the will, into our will nature. So in other words, if I have a thought of doing a deed, that action that I perform is, if I love the deed, the love for the action is guiding the action, and the will, the action is guided by the love. And in our actions, we develop love by letting thoughts stream into the will. In our thinking, we develop freedom by letting the will nature stream into our thoughts. It is by enlivening our thinking, by activating our thinking, we begin to think more actively. And therefore we become free of the lawful limitations. He says, basically, the content of what we think is given to us. Mostly the content of what we get is given to us through education. But in fact, what is not given to us is how we make decisions. How we make decisions, how we form our will, how we begin to combine the concepts and combine the thinking into new patterns. That is where we begin to be creative. Will and thinking the thinking is actually lawful activity. But the way I form conclusions and begin to bring concepts into new relationships with each other, I begin to create the potential for new percepts as well. So So since we are whole human beings, a totality, when we succeed in finding freedom in our life of thoughts and love in our life of will, then freedom participates in our actions and love participates in our thinking. Wow. Okay. So in other words, we need to find freedom in our life of thought through our will, and we need to bring our thoughts to guide the actions in love. Then freedom participates in our actions, and love participates in our thinking. They interfuse and illumine one another so that we accomplish thoughtful actions in love and will imbued thinking from which free actions can spring. Isn't it wonderful? So all we have to do is will our thinking and direct our will with consciousness, with clear thoughts, with loving thoughts. Thus we find how the two greatest ideals of freedom and love interfuse and cohere in us. As we stand in the world, freedom and love are also what we can realize in ourselves in a way that enables the one to connect in the world through us with the other. So this is from the lecture Rudolf Steiner gave in Dornach on the 19th of December in 1920. So friends, to cut to the chase, and we are at the time of I think we need to stop. We begin to see that it is this interfusing of the thinking and the will, how we bring them together. If we use our thinking to guide our will, then the actions we perform will be directed in love. And if we can bring the will into our thinking, when we can will our thinking, it becomes pure thinking, the activity of thinking. We free ourselves from the content of thinking, the concepts which are also always lawfully given, but through thinking, but rather we begin to form creative thinking. We begin to will our thinking, and that way we begin to create a certain freedom, and a potential to be creative. Because that's the other thing, friends. If we are willing our thinking, we're not restricted to the percepts and concepts which already have been brought together. The world, it consists of the world that we observe is lawfully, for everything that we observe, there is a concept, there is an idea behind everything that we observe. So we live in a lawful world. But if we bring our will into our thinking, we can begin to form imaginations of a world that doesn't yet exist. And that way we begin to be creative. Do you get it? So in other words, this is what an artist does. The artist, as you could say, the artist doesn't just look at something and copy it. The artist imagines something which can lawfully stand there, but nobody has ever thought of it before. So creativity comes out as a capacity to think, to will our thinking, and to form new ideas, and therefore to create new actions which will be creative. So I will pause now and turn it back to Tess, and we'll see where we go from here. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you so very much, Brian.
Pleasure.
I think I'm not the only one, I'm sure, who will be going back to rewatch the video. Yes. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's also feeling this mystery that spiritual science presents us as not just an abstraction, but actually the quality of moral imaginations that it actually requires, that life requires, in order to begin to get at my deepest and most essential questions.
Yes. Yes.
Right? Like those questions that are in me, and I think in each of us, what does it mean to be free? Mm-hmm. The deepest require these pictures that you just brought us.
Yeah.
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 But it is, as you said, this grail, meaning gradual, right? Yeah. Step by step. And so I couldn't imagine a better kickoff and beginning to this course that we're embarking on, which is seeking to apply Rudolf Steiner's legacy and the ideas, the concepts of anthroposophy. We're applying these to the questions that life presents us, that I was born into.
Yes.
And it'll take rewatching the video, right? It'll take a lot of integration to make it my own and our own. And you really, I think, embody what it looks like, somebody who has lived these ideas for a long time. So thank you so much for gifting us.
You're very kind, Jordan. Thank you. Thank you. You're very generous. Thank you, dear friends. I hope that all of you will continue your studies of Rhoda Steiner's work. And I have to say, these lectures called Universal Spirituality and Human Physicality, this lecture cycle, there are several chapters in here where he just really describes what he was doing when in 1893 and 1894 when he was writing the book. He re-edited the book and republished it, I think, in 1918. And he speaks about how the book has grown in him. But basically, this collection of lectures is actually quite a beautiful collection because it's addressing how does thinking, feeling, and willing, how does the human being bridge the divide between our spiritual nature, our soul nature, and living on the earth in a creative way. How do we become spirits of freedom and love? And I have to say, they're absolutely stunning. Each lecture is absolutely stunning. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Brian. So now we'll have a moment to take a pause and a rest for yourself. Some people may choose to leave, and we'll come back in 3 minutes and have some time to just wrap up together as a group for those who wish to stay. We recommend maybe taking time with your journal, and you could turn off your video and just digest and take in what all that beautiful content. So thank you. And are we saying goodbye to Brian? We can, or
well, I will stay because I think there may be some questions.
Wonderful. So there'll be some time for a little Q&A when we come back in just a couple minutes.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so welcome back, and yeah, we'll do a little open space right now. And if you want to type in the chat, or you could raise your hand going to the reaction button in the bottom, raise hand. Okay, Karen, I'm gonna ask you to unmute.
Yes, I actually wrote a couple of questions in. So I'm not expecting both of them to be answered, but the first question was just to ask you to say a little bit more about the 12 worldviews. And the second question was, is there a process of education that shifts the teenager out of desire into wish? So in other words, into the tasks of young adulthood.
Wonderful questions. I can answer your first question quickly. I think the 12 worldviews. The lecture cycle called Human, or the book called Human and Cosmic Thought is where Rhoda Steiner goes into the 12 worldviews. And basically there is a kind of polarity. And you could say, on the one hand, you could say there's a world of idealism. I'll do it this way. I'll do it this way. Idealism on one side and realism are the worldviews are polar opposite points of view. So there are some people that say the world is ideal, and other people will say, no, the world is real. So the idealist will tend to live, the idealist will tend to always form ideas about things, but the realist will say, those are just ideas. I'm dealing with reality here. So the realist and the idealist are one basic polarity. The other main polarity he establishes, or that Rhoda Steiner articulates, is that there are some people that say the world is only matter, and that's the point of view of materialism. But others will say, no, the world is spirit. What appears to be matter is merely everything that appears to be matter is in fact spirit. So we have these basic poles of reality, idealism and realism, and materialism and spiritism. And now, in addition to that, there are transition points of view. On the idealism side, if we move from idealism down toward materialism, we come into the world. The idealists will say there's just a world of ideas, but the person who's moving more toward the material point of view would say, no, well, there are ideals, there are ideas, but the one thing we can say about the ideals is they're rational. So rationalism is a step downward from idealism. Rationalism. I don't accept every ideal, but I will accept those ideals which are rational. The opposite point of view to rationalism, by the way, would be above realism, to say, I don't know if the world is rational or not, but I know that the world is dynamic. The point of view of dynamism is the opposite of rationalism. They're complementary points of view, not opposite, but they're complementary points of view. Now, if we go down from rationalism further down toward materialism, I don't know if the world is rational, but I know that the world can be calculated. The world obeys mathematical laws. And this is the point of view of mathematism. So we have idealism, rationalism, mathematism. And the opposite of mathematism, by the way, is to say, I don't know if the world is mathematical or not. I don't think so. I think the world is one united spirit, which is connected with a monad. So it's called monadism. There is one unifying spirit. What you're calling mathematism is actually the expression of a oneness, of a one divine world called the monad. And then we come ultimately down to the stage of materialism, and opposite materialism is spiritism at the top, complementary points of view. If we continue on around from materialism toward the world of realism, we could say, I don't know if the world is material, but I know that I receive sensations from the world. The world produces sensations. So that's the point of view of sensationalism. It's not, sensationalism doesn't mean in this context, the person's always making more of something that they, but sensationalism is the point of view that sensations give us something to think about. Yes. And then as we move from sensationalism upward toward realism, we could say, well, I'm not limiting myself to sensations. I find that the sensations are the response to phenomena. The nature provides phenomena. So this point of view is called phenomenalism. And now, by the way, sensationalism, opposite sensationalism, would be the point of view called pneumatism. It's P-N-E-U-T-A-I-S-M. P-N-E-U-N, new, P-N-E-U, sorry, new, M. I think it's M-A-T-I-S-M, pneumatism. And this is the point of view. Pneuma is the Greek word which means spirit. So there's a kind of a spirit. Thank you for the spelling, Karen. Bless you. Pneumatism. There you have it on the screen. Pneumatism. So the point of view of pneumatism is that there is a general spiritual world, the pneuma. Yeah. Now the point of view of spiritism, of course, is to say there are spiritual beings, and they are called the seraphim, the cherubim, the thrones, and so forth. It's to be able to perceive the actual spiritual world. Yeah, spiritism. And now, if we continue around, we have rationalism. So I think we've actually covered all 12. We then get to realism, which is a complement of idealism. If I missed anything, I think.
Did you get across from phenomenalism?
Across from phenomenalism, thank you. I didn't. It's psychism. So psychism is just above idealism in the direction toward spiritism, psychism. And so the world of idealists, the idealists would say, well, the world consists of ideas. And the psychist would say, well, I don't know if the world consists only of ideas. I consider that the soul itself, the human being is a soul being, and that the soul is perceiving something which may include something more than the world of ideas. So psychism is to say it's the point of view of the soul that is perceiving ideas and everything else. So those are the 12 points of view briefly, and we could spend weeks on them, but By the way, in addition to that, in that same lecture cycle, he says there are also seven soul moods, and they're connected with the 7 planets. We don't have to go there, but anyway, future study, friends. I just encourage you to get it. It's good stuff. Okay, I think it's called Human and Cosmic Thought. Other questions? What's the opposite of phenomenalism? Did we get that? Yeah, the opposite of phenomenalism is psychism.
I've got one question.
Okay.
Just got unmuted. Your beautiful explanation on the blackboard ended up with creative deeds being done,
Yeah.
deeds and actions. And it got me to thinking about people who are doing evil. They're not doing creative deeds, but rather destructive or destroying type of deed. And I wondered if there was some kind of a disconnect in that thinking process. Well, after I asked it, I was wondering if it was maybe a disconnect, excuse me, a disconnect with the logos at the top.
Sure.
But I don't know. What's your thoughts on that would be?
Well, I think what I did not go into and could have, but there are adversarial beings, there are spiritual beings who are participating in creating the human being, creating the conditions that a human being can become a spirit of freedom and love. But it actually required, in order for the human being to feel resistance and to feel isolated from the spiritual world, certain spiritual beings agreed to play a role. They put on black hats and they play the role of adversaries. Now, I'm not making light of the situation at all. This is a very serious thing, but we have to realize that the beings called Lucifer and Ahriman and the Azuras and the Antichrist, these are actually members of the spiritual hierarchy who have perceived that something is necessary for evolution to continue. That is, if everyone was always in communion with everyone, there would be no sense of individuality. We would feel that we were all one, and we would be all one. But in order for personalities to develop, in order for us to feel isolated, it was necessary for certain spiritual beings to put on a black cap and to play and to create resistance and to create conditions where confusion and even, now they take their role very seriously. It's not a game to them. Lucifer is downright serious about trying to abstract us out of the world and take us into a kind of an ideal world. But really not, Lucifer would like us to leave the earth and kind of go into another world. Ahriman would like to harden us into a calculable world and to bind us to the earth with where he is the ruler. Through his kind of mathematical, logical, intellectual coldness, basically. So Lucifer takes us into an ideal abstraction of a world away from the world. Ahriman wants to harden us into a kind of a mechanistic, materialistic abstraction and bind us under his rulership. So Lucifer and Ahriman are playing complementary roles. There are other adversaries that are playing other roles as well. So these adversarial beings create situations which then lead us into Lucifer. In fact, Rudolf Steiner says Lucifer is the great, our impulse toward freedom comes from Lucifer. Lucifer is the one that really is the spirit of freedom. But Lucifer he's been urged to go farther and to create and to say he wants us to be so free that we won't even be here. So he wants us to leave the earth and be free in his realm, you see. But in fact, the earth is the place where we can only be free. We can only be free under the conditions of the earth. So anyway, we begin to say that that's the reason that evil exists through people's deeds is either that they are misreading they're misreading the precepts and the concepts, or they are tempted through selfishness or through abstract materialism or toward whatever it may be. They are being tempted by adversarial beings, led down a path in order that they will participate in what that particular being's intentions are. Does that help a little bit? Good, thank you. Now, by the way, friends, I just want to add to you, and this is a very important thing, it is up to the human being to ultimately not slay the dragon, not to kill these beings. That's not our intention, but rather it is our intention. Rudolf says it is only through love. Lucifer and Ahriman are both overcome by love. When a human being actually becomes a spirit of love, he says, when you put the three, if you put, and he did in the statue of the representative of humanity, he carved a statue of Lucifer and Ahriman and the Christ in between them. And Lucifer falls over backwards because Lucifer cannot bear to be in the presence of love. And Ahriman completely retreats and withdraws down into a cave. So in the statue of a representative humanity, the Christ is just a being of love. The Christ is not forcing Lucifer to retreat nor Ahriman to retreat, but in the presence of love, these extremes cannot exist. So ultimately, when the human being is capable of achieving love, the Asuras are connected very deeply with the impulses of will. So again, when human being is able to do the right thing, when we're able to create goodness rather than evil, the question came up on the screen. So anyway, and the Antichrist is basically opposing the I. So when we're able to bring our true self to birth, the Antichrist is really unhappy. Now, ultimately, friends, remember, it is our job to gradually, by resisting them and by becoming a spirit of freedom and love, they will no longer have a task. They will then be welcomed back in the spiritual world and probably given honorary degrees because they played the role to make it possible for human beings to become spirits of freedom and love. You get it? So in other words, there's not some ultimate punishment and damnation for the adversaries. That's not the game here. The game is to create the possibility for human being to become free. Okay. Other questions?
A question came earlier about from Chikying. Is resolve on in your board? Resolve, is that close to inspiration?
Well, it would be. There are different ways to bring these things together, and I appreciate the question. Resolve. You could say if we have imagination, inspiration, and intuition, you could say yes. Intention would appear to go with imagination. No, I'm sorry. What is it? It's imagination. I can't read my own writing here. No, wish would go with imagination. Intention would go with inspiration, and resolve would go with intuition. Whether now that is a scheme. It doesn't necessarily mean that the scheme is true. What we're doing is we're taking different things out of Rudolf Steiner's characterizations, and you're able we're able to bring certain correspondences, but then the question is, does the correspondence really fit the situation? And I can't say 100% that is the correspondence. That is exactly true. Any other questions? I've taken a lot of your time, friends.
Oh, well, you have generously offered your time.
Well, I'm happy to do it.
And we are so grateful, especially for this extra. I'm just so impressed with your setup too. You've really cracked the Zoom teaching presenting code, and I'm in awe of that.
Thank you.
So I think we could.
Actually, I have two brief poems. Could I read them?
Oh yeah.
Okay. One is by Maya Angelou. It's called Touched by an Angel. And I'll show it to you so you can see it as well. So this is Touched by an Angel by Maya Angelou. We, unaccustomed to courage, exiles from delight, live coiled in shells of loneliness until love leaves its high holy temple and comes into our sight to liberate us into life. Love arrives, and in its train come ecstasies, old memories of pleasure, ancient histories of pain. Yet if we are bold, love strikes away the chains of fear from our souls. We are weaned from our timidity in the flesh of love's light. We dare be brave. And suddenly we see that love costs all we are and will ever be. Yet it is only love which sets us free. The poem requires several readings to really begin to plumb its depths, but I hope that you will look for it online. It's really quite a very beautiful poem by Maya Angelou. And the last thing I'd like to read you is actually, it is one of Renee's favorite quotes from Christopher Fry, Sleep for Prisoners. And it's connected with kind of where we are. The human heart can go to the links of God, and dark and cold we may be, but this is no winter now. The frozen misery of centuries breaks, cracks, begins to move. The thunder is the thunder of the flows, the thaw, the flood, the upstart spring. Thank God our time is now, when wrong comes up to face us everywhere, never to leave us, till we take the longest stride of soul we ever took. Affairs are now soul size. The enterprise is exploration into God. Where are you making for? It takes so many thousand years to wake, but will you wake for pity's sake? So this is one of Rene Credo's favorite passages. We'd speak it frequently, at least once a week, if you. And it's a very powerful picture. There's one more quick thing if I can find it. Let's see. Okay. No, I'm not able to put my hands on it. So, dear friends, I will let you go. Thank you very much for asking me to do this with you. And I will send you all the very best, and hope that your continuing studies go very, very well.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for being here. You've given us such a gift, and truly it was a sort of meaningful beginning to our program. So I'm so glad you were here to inaugurate this year for us.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Best wishes in your studies. Thank you, friends.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.